Welcome to Austen Mondays, everyone. I am your host, Edward G. Pettit from the Rosenbach Museum and Library in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And for 24 weeks, we are going on a biblioventure with Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice. In each episode, I talk with a special guest, a brilliant Austen scholar, creator, or Janeite about Austen and her works. Then I have an hour-long conversational annotation with a chapter co-host in which we illuminate, elucidate, and explicate a few chapters of Pride and Prejudice. And our special guest today is Juliette Wells. Welcome, Juliette.
Hello, everyone. Thanks, Ed.
Great to have you here. More with Juliette in a moment, everyone. And then stay tuned for our chapter annotation segment when Casey MacMillan will join me to talk about chapters 35 to 38 or Volume 2, chapters 12 to 15, if you have an edition that lists them that way. We're calling that Darcy Writes, Lizzy Reflects. And if you're watching live on YouTube right now or watching the recording, I invite you to please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Doing that gives our show greater visibility and helps us grow the Austen Mondays audience. Now let's take a turn about the room. Juliette Wells is professor of literary studies in the Department of Visual Literary and Material Culture at Goucher College in Baltimore. She is the author of Everybody's Jane, which I have, Austen in the Popular Imagination, and Reading Austen in America, which I also have, and the editor of two Penguin Classics editions of Austen, Persuasion and Emma. She will guest co-curate a major international Austen exhibition at the Morgan Library and Museum in New York in 2025. And her next book this year, is a new Jane Austen, How Americans Brought Us the World's Greatest Novelist, which centers on visionary writers and collectors who from the 1880s and to the 1980s advocated for Austen's literary significance, broadened her readership, and preserved artifacts vital to her legacy. There's a lot, done a lot, and are doing a lot still. Like half of your bio was coming up, which I love. So I'm happy to have you here, Juliette, on the show today.
Oh, well, Happy New Year, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Yes, happy New Year. And I just saw you last in Philadelphia and at the Free Library of Philadelphia, which was literally 2 days before Austen Mondays began. I got to see you give a lecture on some of the stuff that's going to be in your new book. Is it the Lorraine Hanaway Memorial Lecture?
Yes, this is JASNA, Jane Austen Society of North America, Eastern Pennsylvania region. I believe it was the second year of an endowed lecture in memory of Lorraine Hanaway, a longtime JASNA member, founding member of the organization, in fact. So that was an honor.
And your lecture centered on some of these things that are going to come up in your new book. But first, I want to ask you about Goucher and the collection. It is Goucher, right? I'm saying that correctly as an East Coast.
You are saying that right. I say Goucher when I'm joking around, like we go shopping at Target.
Yeah, I would say Goucher no matter what it was pronounced. So
John Franklin Goucher was not the founding president of the Women's College of Baltimore, as it was originally known, but he was a beloved early president, and so the college was named after him. It did remain a women's college. If anyone in the Mid-Atlantic area has an association with grandma attending Goucher, the college did remain women only until the late 1980s, but we have been co-ed for since then, a good long time.
And they have a special collection there.
We have a special Jane Austen collection. So in one sense, it's a collection of collections. There was a founding donor, and there since have been many generous additional donors. But our founding donor was named Alberta Hersheimer Burke, and she was a 1928 graduate of Goucher, so definitely during the women's college years. And she was a native of La Crosse, Wisconsin, who came east to Goucher, majored in English literature, went back to Wisconsin, earned a master's degree from the University of Wisconsin at Madison, and then married a Baltimore man, brother of one of her classmates, often happened in those days. And she had fallen in love with Austen and decided that she would become a self-taught Jane Austen expert and a collector. So she was collecting very much at, I would say, a kind of affordable level. She had some family money. Her husband prospered in his work. He was an estate lawyer, but she was not able to buy everything that everything that came up for auction. She was definitely not collecting at the Henry Folger levels of,
Uh-huh.
oh, write another check, oh, secure more money to buy yet another first folio. So it was really important that Alberta Burke had expertise. She didn't buy anything that she thought was overpriced, but she definitely lucked out in her timing. So graduated Goucher in 1928, married in 1930, and then in the early 1930s, she became serious about this project of collecting items that anyone would consider valuable. First editions, rare editions, manuscript material. She ultimately owned about a dozen letters and other documents in
Even
Jane
that she was
Austen's
able
handwriting.
to acquire those at,
Right.
because these were still the days when the prices weren't astronomical.
They were not astronomical. And again, because she kept tabs on auctions, she would annotate an auction catalog, she would communicate with her trusted um, dealer agent person in London. She would often say, my budget for this auction is
Hmm.
this, $200, say, and please, here in priority order are the items that I would like you to bid for. So she was choosy, she was careful, and she cared a lot about the items that she acquired, and she knew her collection intimately. She cataloged it by hand. She taught herself how to catalog in order to keep records of her collection. So items that anyone would consider valuable, all the way through items that only she considered valuable, but
Hmm.
that we are so grateful for her omnivorous collecting. She was very interested in translations of Austen's novels, and she picked those up when she traveled in Europe chiefly. And her friends and family knew that she was collecting. So if anyone traveled anywhere that she hadn't been yet, they would go to the bookstore and come home and say, "Hi, I found you a copy of Austen in this language." She also began collecting what we call ephemera, paper materials never meant to last, newspaper articles, playbills, anything related to an adaptation of Jane Austen that she could get her hands on. And she
Hmm.
was very enterprising. If she heard an adaptation on the radio, those were quite common in those early decades of her collecting. She would write to the production company and request a script. And she would explain in her letter, "I'm a private collector. I will make no commercial use of this,
Hmm.
but I would be so grateful." And sometimes she got yeses, sometimes she got nos.
And
And
these are the kind of items that came to Goucher, correct? Like,
yes. So at Alberta Burke's death in 1975, she bequeathed the great majority of her collection to Goucher. The manuscript material, the dozen manuscripts, went to the Pierpont Morgan Library in New York, as it was
mhm.
then known, because the Morgan already had the
Yeah.
largest collection of Austen letters on this side of the Atlantic, and Alberta Burke wanted that material to be together. But almost everything else came to Goucher, including all of the records of her collecting. So
Mhm.
there's a rich archive of her correspondence, of her notes, her letters, letters that she received from Austen scholars, drafts of her own correspondence. Just a tremendous amount of material. In some ways, we've only scratched the surface of it. Oh, she also annotated her books in her teeny tiny handwriting. And I mean, there was just
Mhm.
such a wealth to discover. And she was a fascinating person. She was well aware that the rarest item in her collection was a copy of the first American printing of an Austen novel. And she was so curious about the origins of this book, and she was able to discover much less than would have satisfied her curiosity. This was the novel Emma, which was printed in 1816, the same calendar year. Well, on the title page anyway, the
Yeah.
first London edition of Emma says 1816, and we know that it was available for sale in very late December 1815. But officially, the title page of the first London edition, the title page of the first American edition, both say 1816. But Alberta, when she acquired her copy, it was one of three known to exist. Then there subsequently was known to be a fourth, which was bought by the eminent Austen bibliographer David Gilson. And then I turned up number 5 and number 6 in my own research. I can't take a tremendous amount of credit for this. It was a matter of of ascertaining that libraries had copies that they had always known that they had a copy. It just, the wider world of Austen scholars had not known that these fifth and sixth copies exist.
But not in Philadelphia, where it was published.
Philadelphia. This
They're
is the
all,
wonderful
yeah.
connection to the Rosenbach. Matthew Carey of Philadelphia, when Philadelphia was the premier publishing city in the United States, not New York, that was later, when it was Philadelphia, Matthew Carey, Irish born, was one of the most prominent publishers of his day, and he was very entrepreneurial. So he would reprint, we say that he created unauthorized reprints, not to say pirated copies, because international copyright didn't exist yet. So unauthorized. The authors did not know he was doing this. The original London publishers did not know he was doing this. But he was trying to offer a more affordable product to his American customers. And of course, he was also trying to make a profit. So he took a flyer on Emma. He did not know who the author was because nobody knew who the author was except Jane Austen's family circle. He had seen praise for Emma in the British press. He quoted this praise in his own advertising for his edition. He received his first London edition from London in a shipment of newly published books that he had a standing order for with a London publisher. So he Matthew Carey, in Philadelphia, would receive a lot of new books. He would read them or read through them, and he would decide which looked to him worth putting up his own capital.
Were they all John Murray books, John Murray publishers, or
No,
were
they
they
were not.
a variety of
No,
publishers? And
variety.
He
Variety. So had Austen been more famous, had Austen been Sir Walter Scott, for example, then everyone would have been rushing the unbound sheets of the newest novel across the Atlantic and competing to print them as fast as possible. That was not Austen's level of fame at all during her lifetime. And it was a pleasure in research at the, now I'm blanking, Library Company of Philadelphia is where I took my wonderful rare book school course with Jim Green and learned about Matthew Carey, and right next door, Historical Society of Pennsylvania, which is one of the two places in the US where Matthew Carey's archives are held. The other is the American Antiquarian Society in Worcester, Mass. Mm-hmm. And between those two archives, it was possible to find Carey's financial record for paying the printers of Emma, which yielded the answer to the question, how many copies of Emma were in this first American printing? 500. So not a lot. A kind of, canny guess by a publisher as to how many to invest in. He could, of course, always commission more if they sold out, which they did not. Sadly, they did not. And the correspondence also showed that there was no rush in doing this at all. Carey sent the first London edition to printers in Trenton, New Jersey, named Justice and Cox. And he supplied them with some paper, but not enough to complete the job. And so Justice and Cox wrote letters to him from the summer of 1816 through December saying, well, we're trying, but we need more paper. Please send us more paper. And paper supplies in America were at a low ebb that year. And it wasn't until mid-December that the printing was finished, and Justice and Cox wrote to Carey that they were going to try to send the unbound sheets by water before the river froze to Philadelphia so that those sheets could be bound and Carey could sell his copies of Emma. And that happened. And so in the very end of December 1816, but only by a squeak, Carey was able to begin selling this 2-volume, 3 volumes in 2, more affordable, more compactly printed, a little harder to read, copies of Emma to Americans for about half the price of what an imported 3-volume novel from London would have cost. So you were supporting American manufacturing, supporting American paper makers, printers, binders, the publisher. You would have all the words from the original Emma with some very entertaining printer's errors to keep you awake. And you could read this novel by someone whose name you didn't know.
And this is the beginning of, Austen being read in America, even though some copies from British publishers would come through, but there would be more
Yes.
just individual readers would have those.
Yes. Well, we do know that certain prominent Americans were, and those in the other part of North America, people in Canada were reading Austen too,
uh,
copies from England. So let me show everyone, if I may. I mentioned that there are only 6 copies known to exist. So you and I are never going to own one. A 7th copy may come to light at some point. But here's the main website for the Jane Austen collection at Goucher College. And you can see information about our founding collector and a lovely portrait. She was a very fashionable woman, Alberta Burke. But I wanted to draw everyone's attention here under Explore, go to Emma in America. And this we put together for the bicentennial of publication of Emma several years ago. And it is an open access, really easy to use, lovely digital facsimile of our copy, beginning with all this excellent evidence of provenance, first owner, Countess of Dalhousie, then the person who wrote these pencil notes was the second owner, and that was Siegfried Sassoon, the World War I poet. The American collector Frank J. Hogan, with his fancy bookplate, briefly owned this copy, and then our collector Alberta Burke, who had this bookplate made for all of the books in her Jane Austen collection. And so you, at your desktop, at your iPad, can have the experience of being a reader of the first American printing. Here we see C.B. Dalhousie, the signature of the first owner of this copy, and then everything is exactly like the first edition from London, except the 3 volumes in 2, which is your giveaway that this is a reprint. And of course, instead of London, 1816, we have Philadelphia, published by M. Carey and for sale by Wells and Lilly of Boston.
mm-hmm.
And that really overly humble, she probably didn't write it herself. We know she didn't admire the Prince Regent dedication, is there, formatted very similarly to the first London edition. And then you get going and you see smaller type, narrower margins than you would have had if you had paid twice as much and gotten the imported.
Well, at least it wasn't double column yet, because that'll come up soon.
Right.
Because then after Carey does this, there's that's 16 years or so before Austen is published again in Philadelphia. And it's not just Carey, now it's Carey and Lee, right? It's his son.
Right. Henry Carey, Matthew Carey's son, took over the business, and he had partners, first Isaac Lee and then Blanchard, whose name I don't remember. And Carey and Lee and Blanchard published the complete first edition.
Yeah.
Or the first complete edition, that's clear. First complete edition of Austen's novels in the US in the 1830s. So that included what would be the second edition of Emma, as well as the others.
Pride and Prejudice, or Elizabeth Bennet, or Pride and Prejudice, as they retitled it.
They titled it.
The only one they retitled is we have that at the Rosenbach in boards, in original boards.
Oh, lovely, great.
And then they take it and then they put it in 2 volume, all the novels in double column format, and they cram it all into 2 volumes. And then a few years later, they do it 2 volumes in 1. So you get like big fat volume of all 7 novels, all bound together for people to buy. And what's interesting to me is that this is the way that Austen then gets popularized, in a sense. Am I right in thinking that because it's now being done in cheaper and cheaper editions and all in one, more people can then read Austen and discover Austen? It's not just single volumes and sold only to this elite audience, especially as this literacy rises and this magazine culture rises in the United States. Austen gets spread out among the readers through these publishers in Philadelphia and then others.
I'm not, honestly, I don't know who could have read those all-in-one volumes. I don't think you could really enjoy Austen in that horrible, super tiny print, double column. It's hard for me to imagine that converted anybody, but certainly those books are important, as at least Carey, Lee, and Blanchard's effort to suggest to you that Austen belonged on your shelf, even if not read. But definitely we have lots of evidence of the individual publications, the 1832 ones, going into circulating libraries and then having very heavy use. And it would be an interesting project for someone out there to try to trace any circulating library acquisition of the all-in-one volumes. That's a question I haven't thought about.
Now, how, because I still have to ask you your Jane Austen discovery moment, which I didn't ask
Oh,
at the beginning,
yeah.
but I want to say now, before we ask that, then how does this lead into this work that you're doing now directly leads into the work you have coming up?
Right. Well, I have now completed 3 books on Austen's readers and fans. And it is completely obvious to everyone that I did not plan to write 3 of them because I have written them out of chronological order. Everybody's Jane, which you mentioned, is all about the turn of the millennium and Austen fandom kind of post Colin Firth, with one exception, which is a chapter introducing Alberta Burke as a forerunner of today's fans. So that was my first effort researching her. It was before I was on the faculty at Goucher. Having written that book, then when I joined the Goucher faculty in 2012, I was well aware that this very rare gem of the collection, 1816 Philadelphia Emma, raised so many questions that had yet to be answered about its origins. And I started digging. I went to visit the remaining copies. I found out stories of their owners. I researched, as I mentioned earlier, I researched the publication of it, and that all went into the book Reading Austen in America, which starts with the 1816 Philadelphia Emma and carries through Austen fans in Cambridge and Boston in the 1840s, 1850s, 1860s.
Yeah.
And then I didn't plan to write another book, but the one I've just finished and which will shortly be available for pre-order starts just a little bit after that in the 1880s. And again, I was curious about who was helping bring Austen to a broader audience.
Yeah.
And there is yet another chapter about Alberta Burke using newly rediscovered letters. So I do come back to her in every book, but always from a new vantage point.
And then the first scholarship, was it Oscar Fay Adams? These are my notes from your talk.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Oscar Fay Adams, then William Dean Howells, Charles Beecher Hogan, the collector, Beecher Hogan, but the people that then started to write about, publish about Austen in America, because this isn't, you don't go to college to learn Jane Austen in America in the late 19th, even early 20th century.
No, with the exception of the man that Devaney Loser has written about, who wrote the first dissertation on Austen anywhere in the world, George Pellew at Harvard. But he was kind of a one-off. I mean, there was not otherwise a kind of big bringing of Austen into university curricula in those decades. So yeah, my bold claim is that Americans really created Jane Austen studies, not English people.
All right.
That was forgotten. So.
Well, I look forward to reading that. I always start off these segments, and I did today, if only because I'm a slave to my script and I'd forgotten to put it in the script, so I don't have it there. But I love to ask everybody if you had a Jane Austen moment in your life, a discovery moment, or with Pride and Prejudice, or with Austen herself.
Oh, it wasn't Pride and Prejudice. Gosh, I read that one last. I read Pride and Prejudice when I was preparing for my qualifying comprehensive exams in graduate school, which is the worst possible circumstances for enjoying Pride and Prejudice. But Emma was actually my first Austen novel, and I have to thank Dr. Erica Jacobs, my wonderful AP English high school teacher at the unlikely Thomas Jefferson High School for Science and Technology in Northern Virginia, where I am a failed graduate, became an English professor. But yeah, I read Emma. I was very interested, and then I took courses in college that brought me more Austen, but I definitely went in through the student / scholarly door at first, and then later discovered the astonishing worlds of Jane Austen fandom, present and historical.
What was that first reading, Emma? Do you have memory? Like, did you recognize that this was for you?
I recognized greatness, but I was 16.
Oh yeah.
I was a junior in high school. Yeah. So I would not say that the heavens opened.
Okay.
But I was really interested, and it was clear that this was challenging, this was rewarding, this this was something, for the brainy aspiring person or the aspiring brainy person. But
Did you
it
then
took time.
did you then turn to some of the other novels in just your free time and not necessarily because you must have, because you wouldn't have
I
had
mean,
signed all of those other novels, right?
I can tell you that I made a pilgrimage to Jane Austen's house in Chawton, England, as part of a graduation from college trip. So I had read and studied Austen's other novels, and my best friend at the time and I went to England, went to Chawton, and I bought two books in the Jane Austen's house gift shop, and one of them was the then fairly new Deirdre LeFay edition of Austen's Letters,
Mm-hmm.
which had not come into my studies because in the 90s at Johns Hopkins that you were not reading letters by authors. And the other book that I bought, which I treasure and adore and reread, was Emma Thompson's diaries, written during the filming of Sense and Sensibility.
Oh, yeah.
So the high and the low, Jane Austen's actual letters, Emma Thompson's hugely entertaining and very irreverent diaries, kind of sparked the rest of my explorations of Austen from that point on.
Well, that's great. One little question came through, and it's just for the website link from Janice asked.
Oh,
I'll add that to the comments on YouTube, everybody. I'm sorry I didn't have that ahead of time to add already, but I'll put that. Yeah.
Hopefully, the search engine should work, and if you search Jane Austen Goucher,
Yeah, you pretty much
come right up for you, and then find Emma in America, and you can pretend that you own a copy. Enjoy yourself with it.
Well, this is a pleasure. I'm so looking forward to a new Jane Austen, your next book, and obviously the Morgan exhibition in it goes 23. It's in 2 years, so I think like 25. That's 3 years. No, it's 2 years away.
I know, it's close.
Really turn the calendar now. And thank you for taking a turn about the room with us today.
Well, thank you so much, and everyone enjoy discussing these amazing chapters. You guys have the best chapters, I think.
Good. All righty. It'll be fun today. Thanks so much, Juliette. I'll see you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Everyone, next week, we will not have a turnabout the room segment because we are spending the entire show next week talking about film and TV adaptations of Pride and Prejudice. In November, we had the episode called Darcy's Wet Shirt, the 1995 BBC TV Pride and Prejudice. And on episode 14, coming up, we will present Kira and All the Rest, film and TV adaptations. I had written that do not star Colin Firth, but then I realized, oh, wait, maybe we'll wind up talking about Bridget Jones's Diary, which is a kind of adaptation. And so maybe Colin Firth will show up next week. We'll see. And joining me for all of that will be all the chapter co-hosts, Casey MacMillan, Kathleen Hudson, and Dr. Lauren Nixon will join us next week. Coming soon, we also have some great turnabout the room guests coming up. Stephanie Barron, who writes the Jane Austen mysteries, will be with us on January 16th. Collins Hemingway on January 23rd. And the Rosenbach's own Dr. Alexander L. Ames will join us on January 30th to talk about tea and the tea ceremony and tea drinking in Austen's time. That'll be a lot of fun. Let me take this moment to thank all of you for watching this episode. As a nonprofit organization, the Rosenbach Museum and Library depends on the generosity of friends and supporters like you to keep programs like this free and accessible to hundreds of fellow Austen lovers worldwide. So if you would like to donate to the Rosenbach, you can do so at our website. You could also become a member. Membership gives you free museum admission, discounts on programs and courses, and exclusive invitations to members-only events. You can learn more about how to become a member on our website. And at the end of every show, I give a shout out to all who have donated since our last show. I will do that today. And also just remember, people join from all over the world. People are members who live in other countries. I know you can't visit here regularly, but we do plenty of virtual work that will help, keep you satisfied with that membership. And also it is just a great help to us to help care for our collections. Lots of great in-person and virtual programs and courses at the Rosenbach coming up. And I will share some things with you. If you go to the Rosenbach website, rosenbach.org, you see there's programs and courses here. You can click on that. There's all kinds of courses and programs coming up. You can hit the calendar here and see every month we have a bevy of great programs and courses beginning. Lots of fun stuff to do, including our new courses that are happening soon. And let me see what else. Oh, and Austen Mondays merchandise is still available. We have t-shirts, stickers, and buttons that you can go to our website and buy, and the links are also in the chat here and can be found on our website. And joining me, and we also have the Austen Mondays Facebook group that you can join and chat with us, more info, news, links, conversation, and fun on our Facebook group for Austen Mondays. But for today's chapter annotation segment, I'm going to welcome back my co-host, Casey MacMillan. Oh, so Christmassy. I love it.
Thanks. Trying to keep the spirit alive.
Good.
Despite starting also dry January. So this is fake.
I've never done dry January in my, obviously never done that in my life. So.
I felt like I drank enough in the last 2 weeks for all of January. So just giving it a little rest.
That for me is a Tuesday. I don't slow down. Hey, do you have anything to plug today before we get into things coming up?
Always, Ed. Always.
I should have let you know sooner if you had something to plug. I'm sorry I didn't.
Well, a couple things. Tiny Dynamite, one of the theater companies I run here in Philadelphia, has, if you're ready for the next holiday, our pop-up Valentine's Day performance is coming up in a little more than a month. And just this morning, I had a meeting with all of the theatrical designers for the world premiere adaptation of Jane Eyre that I will be directing and have co-written for the Philadelphia Artists Collective here in Philadelphia. That is happening in May. So
I can't wait for that. So although we need to get on the same schedule one of these days, because what happened was you did an Austen show, then I had an Austen show. I did a Jane Eyre show. Now you're gonna have we need to get together at one point.
We do.
Plan the same. No, you don't. You do what you want to do, clearly. But I can't wait for that. Speaking of not staying sober for the holidays, tell everybody in the Drinking with Jane and Ed today, I am drinking what I am calling the drink's called Promise and Perspective. And what it is after Darcy's revelations in the letter, Elizabeth's kind of, she's pondering that new outlook and things have changed for her. And I think she needs a kind of bright, refreshing, hip cocktail, something to kind of keep her in a sunny mood, forward thinking, nothing heavy. And so it's basically I took a Cosmo and kind of changed it because I thought a Cosmo would be a real cool fun drink for her. So I just changed it a little, and it's vodka Cointreau, but I had pear brandy, which is really delicious. And I highly recommend pear brandy. Sometimes I just have pear brandy. I'll get pear brandy in to replace vermouth in a martini, and it's really, really good. A little grenadine syrup for this one, and they're cherries down there, little Luxardo cherries. So
it's beautiful. Yeah, we went through the better part of a bottle of Calvados over here at the MacMillan.
That's nice. A little apple brandy. Yeah, that's nice.
Boy, it is unfair to upstage Ed in his cocktail
He
moment.
is really trying to get into the show here today. Is he is the tree okay? I'd see there's a little bit.
It's fake, so it should be fine. He was literally asleep on the sofa over there until I started to talk. And he's like, you know what? I got to get in there. So
Jane Paulson was here earlier, but there's nothing to get on behind me. But she was here a little bit ago, and she has, I think, since skedaddled because I wasn't paying attention to her. But all righty, what do we have next? Next, we have our chapters. Let's start talking about it. Chapters 35 to 38. Darcy writes, Lizzy reflects, And this is going to be, and Juliette Wells was like, hey, these are great chapters, and
I
so
agree.
good. So I
Yeah.
hope if you're reading an edition that breaks the book down into original volume and chapter divisions, it's volume 2, chapters 12 to 15. And you weren't on the show the last time we were on, when we had like the huge, Kathleen Hudson did it with me with the big proposal. So let's just, before we even jump into this, before she gets the letter, let me get your take on Darcy's disastrous proposal.
I mean, 5 stars, no notes. Everyone should do it like Darcy. If only my husband had done more of disrespecting all my relations and their propriety, like swoon.
Which he'll do again in explaining. But anyway.
We're 15 years in now. We could renew our vows with him doing something so disastrous as that. No, I think, it's so Darcy. And I think, as we meet him here in the center of the novel, I think we find both Darcy and Lizzy at this interesting moment where they're sort of quintessentially the versions of themselves they have presented in the first half of the novel, but also I don't know, they both feel at the precipice of a shift. And for me, like, I don't know, not to be a contrarian, but extra credit to him for even proposing it all and overcoming all his scruples and even his character to do it. And I hope as we move further into the novel, he overcomes more of his character. That would be great for him.
That's what he wants. He's like, please give me credit for this proposal.
Well, and he'll do it in these chapters too, in ways I can't wait to talk about. He's like, and another thing. He hates to be wrong.
So I asked this question last week, and it led to some really interesting conversation. And then there was even a comment on YouTube on last week's on the last episode. Do you think this proposal is worse than Mr. Collins's proposal? Because I went into it thinking it is, and then it leads me down to all these avenues of actually kind of, as different as they are, there's something that unites Darcy and Collins.
Yeah. The chief difference being their relative hotness.
Yeah.
I don't recall in those chapters, Lizzy feeling any gratitude excited in herself at the attentions of Collins being bestowed on her, the way she admits here that she has these moments of like, oh, but he wanted me, in a terrible way. But yeah, I don't know, maybe the gratitude is excited by the hotness. I do think that Darcy should know better to a greater degree than Collins is expected to know better. So yes and no.
You don't want either one of these proposals. So.
I don't know. Maybe look, I was a starving artist for a lot of years. I think I give Lizzy all the credit in the world, and might every woman also ought to stick to her guns, but I might have said yes to the first one.
It's
really poor.
Wait, you might have said yes to Collins? You mean?
No.
You might have said yes to
I might have said yes to Darcy's terrible proposal.
She goes against everything that the average person would do. That is, I think that's true. Especially for her day, when it is not expected that you are supposed to fall in love with someone and then marry them. That is not expected. That is a hope. It would be nice if that happens, but certainly not expected.
Novels, but there is something socially revolutionary for certain in these choices, and the fact that Lizzy is so certain in the rightness of the choices she makes, even as more conventional people around her are saying, like, really?
Yeah,
he's a
Charlotte.
Good yeah.
I mean, Charlotte, even, well, she says yes to Mr. Collins, of course, but I wonder. I don't know if this was last week or before. Like, I wonder if Charlotte was 20, like Lizzy is, would she have said no to Mr. Collins as well, thinking like, I can do better? Charlotte's just at the age where she doesn't think that that's going to happen now. So I wonder.
Yeah. It's one of those great questions. Yeah. I
All
don't know.
righty, write that show. Okay.
Okay. Yes. Charlotte at 20.
Um, Chapter 35 begins. Elizabeth is, well, she awoke the next morning to the same thoughts and meditations. She is troubled. She could not recover from the surprise at what happened. We get the reminder that she's been there for 5 weeks. I mean, this is not, just a few days. She's been there for a while. And she goes out for a walk because she likes to do that. And she catches a glimpse of a gentleman within the grove, and fearful of its being Darcy, she tries to run away, but of course it's Darcy, and he comes up and he gives her holding out a letter, which she instinctively took, and he says with a look of haughty composure, "I have been walking in the grove some time in the hopes of meeting you. Will you do me the honor of reading that letter?" And then with a slight bow, turned again into the plantation, was soon out of sight. So as awkward as ever.
Just to take it back a baby step, you know what I also love is here at the beginning of this chapter, she's afraid of seeing him. She's worried she's going to see him, so she decides not to walk into the park, and she walks somewhere else instead. Yeah. And her relationship to wanting to take a walk into the park has been my relationship to the last cookie in this house for the last 2 weeks. Like, I really shouldn't. I'm gonna though. Like that, just the temptation she feels for walking into this beautiful grove because it's spring is just so endearing to me. I just love her so much. She's like, "Oh no, I'm gonna go in there." And then as feared, he's there.
Yes, with his letter. Which begins by saying, don't worry, this isn't a reproposal. It's not going to be the renewal of an offer that last night was so disgusting to you. And then the reason for it is, he says, my character required it to be written and read. I demand it of your justice. That this is a very, he has been accused of something, and he needs to defend himself.
Always Fitzwilliam Darcy. That is a key characteristic.
Well, is it, or does he? Is it only because no one, as far as he knows, no one will ever hear of this. This is literally just between the two of them. He doesn't have any fear that she'll talk out of school. I don't know why he wouldn't, after the what she said to him, and he knows that she's been listening to Wickham say things. But this is a very, I wonder, I think it speaks well of him, and the fact that he is only doing this just for the two of them, that he doesn't have to worry about other people thinking ill of him because he's not going to tell anybody he proposed and what she said, and he doesn't think she will.
Yeah, I think that speaks well of him too. And I don't want to get too ahead of ourselves in the content of the letter, but he puts profound trust in Elizabeth Bennet.
He does.
Just hurt him the day before. And I think that speaks very highly of his character. But it is characteristic, at least with Lizzy, every time she is unjust to him or teases him, he always breaks through his reserve in order to refute any unfairness. Perhaps there's something special about her that makes him want to defend himself to any unfairness that she in particular levels at him.
Well, there's 2 accusations, he says, or offenses that he needs to defend. 2 offenses. One is about Bingley and Jane, and that he had detached them. And then the second one was Wickham. And I think he says the first one, Bingley and Jane, isn't a big, right away he says it's not a big deal. It was the separation of 2 young persons whose affection could be the growth of only a few weeks. He doesn't think it's a big deal at all, no matter what Jane thinks, and he says that right off the bat. But the Wickham accusation is a big deal. But he'll deal with the with Bingley and Jane first, and And his reasons are, well, let's just say his reasons, and we can talk about it. His reasons are, number one, that Bingley had been in love before. And so there's nothing, like, he's seen him in love, and he didn't think that was a big deal that Bingley was in love. He didn't think it was a bigger deal with Jane than anybody else he had been in love with. But at Netherfield, it started to look serious when Bingley had the ball. And then when he hears the comment, is it Sir William Lucas first, about the general expectation of their marriage, and then he starts to observe them seriously, much like, this is what Jane Austen characters do. Then they start to observe each other and figure things out. But he thinks that he sees that he can clearly see that Bingley is so head over heels with Jane, but he looks at Jane and he's like, she's way too reserved to be in love. And in a sense, she's not practicing the behavior that a woman does when she is in love. And the same thing that Charlotte warned about, but we'll hit that later. The same thing as Charlotte warned Elizabeth about Jane, like, she needs to let him know that she loves him. He says, your sister's countenance and air was such as might have given the most acute observer a conviction that, however amiable her temper, her heart was not likely to be easily touched. And so, his whole reason is that he doesn't think that she's that in love with him to begin with. And then he goes into the other bigger reasons.
Well, if we could just pause there for a second, because I think it's curious for a man as reserved as Darcy, a man whose proposals were received with shock just the day before because he had given no outward show of his affection. It's a very curious criticism. And I think, and fair too, as you point out, Charlotte does say the same. So women are expected to make a show of affection, and the fact that he is such a catch maybe ought to be enough in his mind for Lizzy. But it is, for one so reserved, it is a curious thing to level it.
Yes. Well, and he's, because, and it follows up too, like, he's not outwardly emotional. And he says, like, this is all, he believes this impartial conviction, the word reason, his objections to marriage, and his investigations are not usually influenced by his hopes or fears. He's claiming he's a totally reasonable person, and that's why he's able to observe them. And of course he's not. I mean, we've seen that with his whole attachment to Lizzy and how he goes against this.
Well, I think what's fun in there too is he won't even concede fully that Lizzy knows better. He mostly does. Where is it? Oh, I've lost it on the page now. Oh, yes, here it is. Here it is. I remained convinced from the evening scrutiny that though she received his attentions with pleasure, she did not invite them by any participation of sentiment. Such lovely formality. If you have not been mistaken here, I must have been in error. Your superior knowledge of your sister must make the latter probable. Probable? Darcy? She's known her for 20 years. Probable? Like, I love that. Just he is also, he's so ready to defend. I mean, I might have been wrong, and you're probably maybe right, but here's what I saw anyway, and here's why it's fair that I thought that. He hates being wrong.
That's the first example here of Darcy splaining then, right? So,
yeah. And for folks here listening on the YouTube, if you're not following along on the Facebook group, I highly recommend, because that was the birth of Ed's phrase, Darcy splaining.
Darcy splaining.
Absolutely delicious. There's such good content on the Austen Mondays Facebook page. But yeah, just he can't give that one away fully. I love it. And I also love that there is an implied criticism of Lizzy too. And you've leveled both these at my door as if they were equal. And all through in here is like, they're not equal. So, but even so, like that I don't know, his defense is multi-layered.
It is.
It's got us energy of like, first of all, And secondly,
it's oratorical, it's formal. This is I have been trained to do this in my classical education, to take these arguments and form them and do these certain, ways of arguing with them. And that's what he's very formal about his argument here.
And beautifully structured.
Mhm.
And maybe that speaks to the failures of his intuition, right? There is such a precise, measured rationality that feels like he leans into more at the expense of intuition. If he'd been a little more observant, maybe he would have seen that Jane had real affection. At the very least, he would have noticed Lizzy didn't like him, which he failed to notice.
Is that a rosé you're drinking there, or is that just wine?
It's a non-alcoholic.
Oh, it is not. Oh, it is. You were being serious. I thought you were joking. Like, yes, I'm like.
Oh, no. I
not
really,
drinking
it's tasty.
again. There you go. All right.
We'll see how long I last.
Well, then he goes into the real object. The real reason he doesn't think they should be married are, one, your mother's family, which means not the Bennet's clan, the five sisters and Mr. Bennett, means that she comes from this, merchant class family.
As Bingley does.
As Bingley does, yes. Another thing that he ignores. And then but then it's the total want of propriety, so frequently, so almost uniformly betrayed by herself, by your three younger sisters, and occasionally even by your father. He really calls out that that's why. He says that it is like, that's the, I'm sorry. Oh, okay. No, then we'll get into Bingley a little bit later. But Bingley leaves, and Elizabeth's got to be well, we've all read this, and I don't know, I read this and I'm like, yeah. And Elizabeth knew at the time too. Now, she won't come to this realization in this first reading of the letter, but she does later. But even when that was happening, when her mom's, Mrs. Bennet is, loudly exclaiming to everybody about how Jane's going to marry Bingley, and he's so rich, and and then my other girls will come in the way of rich men, and Mr. Bennet's, chastising Mary for reading and embarrasses her in front of everybody by telling her to stop playing at the party. I mean, Elizabeth notices these things at the time and is upset by them and tries to stage manage her family a little bit, but of course it can't work. And these are the things that, really affected Darcy's decision to make sure that these two don't get together. And then when Bingley goes to London, Darcy confronts him about it. He pretty much says that, and then he switches. And then it's like, those are the reasons that he says are not going to sway Bingley. Like, Bingley's not going to not marry Jane because of her family. But when Darcy uses the first instance that he had argued that he didn't think Jane was that into him, that was the thing that was able to convince Bingley not to return to Never.
Yeah. You know what I find? There's something I find curious here. I feel embedded in all of this are his own, this is not shockingly deep, but his own objections to Lizzy and wanting to propose himself, right? Why should he care if his friend whose family came up through trade marries someone with some embarrassing relations? That same friend is the brother of Caroline, and the brother-in-law to Mr. Hurst, who never met a couch he didn't fall asleep on drunk. So embedded in all of here is like, well, it's not good enough for him. Like, no, that's not for you to say. It's not good enough for you. And so I think, as he says, my investigations and decisions are not usually influenced by my hopes and fears. I want to believe him to a certain point. I do, because we'll also find that's not true of Lizzy. Her first read of this letter is all about her hopes and fears and her biases. But yeah, he is not able to separate his objections from about his own heart from his objections on Bingley's behalf. He can't do that yet. maybe in future he'll figure that out. Maybe not. But that's what I'm seeing here. It's still about him, even as he says it's about Bingley.
Yes, it is. But he does sway Bingley. And one of the reasons he says he's able to sway Bingley is that, Bingley has great natural modesty with a stronger dependence on my judgment than on his own, that he knows he can say, look, this is a bad idea and you have to take my word for it. And Bingley will be more likely to accept it than not, than to just do what he wanted to do. And it also bothers Darcy considerably that he had to, I condescended to adopt the measures of art so far as to conceal from him your sister's being in town. That it wasn't that he never even told Bingley that she was there. Because why? Because you were afraid Bingley was just going to go and meet her anyway, and then would just discover that she was in love with him. But so I do, if you really thought that Jane was not in love with him,
right,
why would you be afraid of Bingley meeting her in London? But, I guess he doesn't want to go down that road at all, even though he does himself. Like,
yes.
Even though all these reasons that he gives, as you said about Bingley, there are also reasons for him to not propose to Lizzy, and he still proposed. So.
Mm-hmm. And I give him credit. There are things in each of the arguments we have heard Lizzy and Darcy make in the first 2 volumes of the novel so far. They often leave out things that weaken their arguments. They often leave out things that weaken their point of view. They're great rhetoricians. And so I give them a little credit to say, yeah, I shouldn't have done it. I don't know. It feels like a shift. It feels like a shift away from, in the first half of the letter, of how dare you, madam, to something a little more self-reflective, maybe. And that feels like progress.
But it's also strategy, because then it tempers exactly what he writes after that is, I have nothing more to say, no other apology to offer. If I wounded your sister's feelings, it was unknowingly done, but tough. I had to do what I needed to. Like, he doesn't really apologize. He says, like, I did it anyway, and I'm sorry, but I'm not sorry. I'm sorry your sister was hurt, but I needed to do this.
Oh, unpack this for me. I've never thought about that before strategically. So you're suggesting, Ed, that in getting ready to say, I have nothing to apologize for, he lays out that one concession, knowing he's going to say, knowing that his bigger point is a lack of.
That's the way it works on the page, because it's literally, perhaps this disguise was beneath me. It is done, however, and it was done for the best. So it is, that's why I'm not even that sorry that I lied, because hey, it was for the best. This is what he believes. And he's playing that argument to, like, this is what I believe. And I believe that this was for the best is not saying the same thing as it was for the best, right? Like, I really think he's trying to play that, that I guess it objectively says it was done for the best, but it seems to be more that he's trying to convince her that he believed, because all this, so this is why I believe this, this is why I believe this, and so he had to go through with it. So
it feels like there is something in what she said to him the day before of, ruining her sister's happiness that has taken hold. And it feels to me, yes, I think, right, a very active
that is the one
but also turning it around, also working with it, not ready to concede that he was wrong, but there, I feel that
because he didn't think he did that. That's one thing he didn't think he did. I take him at his belief, I guess, that he didn't believe it. Although I have that one nagging thing that why didn't you let them then talk? So
yeah,
there you go. All righty. Well, now he gets into Wickham, and he gives Elizabeth and the reader, and especially the first time reader, the real Wickham story. That he tells the things that Wickham has said too, that how they were attached, and Wickham's father was the steward of the Pemberley estates, and Darcy's father is his godfather and supports him, and really liked Wickham. He gives this one little detail that I find fascinating about Wickham, in that Wickham's father was poor because who had he says his own father
Mhm.
always poor from the extravagance of his wife. And that's all we ever get. Like, that's why Wickham's father didn't have any money, because his wife made him buy everything for her. They live above their means,
Yeah.
you know.
And gives us a sense of, with such a good dad, where did Wickham go wrong?
Mm.
Yeah. It helps me picture a woman who's also vain.
Or Wickham's like his mother,
Yes,
in a
exactly what I'm
sense.
saying.
Yeah.
Yeah. Blame the woman, blame the mother always.
But we don't get any more of that. There's never any more backstory. Even though we might want it to be for Wickham. That's it. That's the extent of the Wickham backstory, I think, right there. And we get it from Darcy. So, which is a shame we don't get it from Wickham. So, like we wouldn't be able to trust what Wickham says. I guess Austen could put Wickham in a position where he would tell the truth, but that never happens.
Incapable.
Then we get Darcy says, hey, I knew him. And I could see what he calls them vicious propensities, the want of principle. Like, my father couldn't see this, but clearly I was the same age as Wickham. I saw him, as a scoundrel his whole life. And I knew that that's what he was. Well, Wickham just blows that he doesn't become a clergyman. And so, then he blows the money that Darcy gives him after his father dies. And then Wickham wants it again. And he's like, oh, you have to give me more money, or give me the
living.
Yeah. The living, as a clergyman. And Darcy's like, there's no way I'm letting you be the clergyman and a living attached to the Pemberley, estates. Then this is when Wickham really goes bad. And Darcy says, first he says, I must now mention a circumstance which I would wish to forget myself, and which no obligation less than the present should induce me to unfold to any human being. Having said this much, I feel no doubt of your secrecy. So he trusts Elizabeth. I'm going to tell you something that nobody knows. There are very few people know. And he goes into this story.
Beautiful, actually. Right? It's so generous to see to her character, Lizzy loves to see the worst in people comically, right? It's why she doesn't like him. He wounded her vanity, and so she's happy to see the worst in him. She enjoys it, and I get that. I enjoy it too, a lot, and I enjoy it when she does it. But there's such circumspect generosity in seeing her rejection of him as separate to her character. I just think it's astonishing that he's going to trust her with a secret that could ruin the most beloved person in the world to him. Like, wow. I think it's amazing.
Someone has just asked a question about, all the M dashes in Darcy's letter. Somebody just asked a question about, and I don't have a proper answer for this, but what do you make of all the numerous double dashes in Darcy's letters? These are called the M dashes, and this was a very 19th century way of writing, that a lot of these long dashes, as they would write. I've read some things about the meaning of M dashes and why they're used, and they should be used in a sense in a prescriptive way. But it's interesting that I hadn't noticed it before, and I just looked at the book too, and they are all there. They're not in my digital text, but they're all in the printed text. And but I think it's a sign that Darcy is quickly writing a letter, that he's not able to just take the time and use just periods and colons and commas, that he has to keep doing these dashes because he's getting all these words out of him. So that winds up being a question I hadn't thought about before, that I think in the way that this is written. Austen's very aware of how people write letters, and has written epistolary novels herself. This novel may have been an epistolary novel in its first draft, and we have evidence of it here, and that's, I think, a sign of somebody making sure that, because he has to write this letter, he has to go home and write this letter, and it's a long letter, and get it to Elizabeth right away.
And yet there's something funny about the M dashes on, typeface You know what it makes me long for? It makes me long for, there must be editions out there, right, where they've put the letters into
Oh
handwriting.
yeah, there
That
is.
must be. That must be lovely. Ooh, yes, do show.
Yeah, there's this edition, Pride and Prejudice, a complete novel with 19 letters from the characters' correspondence written and folded by hand.
Ooh, yes.
And that letter
Husband note, Christmas is coming in
is
359
here,
days.
and it's really big. And there actually this editor who did this edition, Barbara Heller, is doing an edition of Persuasion now. I think it's already out. I think it's been released already. But this is and it's folded like, it's folded very well, and here it is, and it's all written. This is
Oh yes. Can you find a oh wait, yeah, pull up some of those M dashes. Can you find a spot since you've got the right letter there?
they're hard to see because of all the crossings of the T's are long too. But they're shorter than I think they would be sometimes, but it is, and it's too hard for me to read, and especially with the F's, the S's as F's hit sometimes for the double S. But this is available. You can this is a pretty easily acquired edition of Pride and Prejudice. I can't wait to get the Persuasion one, especially for the last, for the Wentworth letter at the end. It's what I really want to read. Back to Wickham.
Right. Where?
He has this is then what Wickham really does. That's hard. Wickham, he starts talking about Georgiana, his sister, and Wickham is there was a prior acquaintance between a Mrs. Young and a Wickham, and Mrs. that Darcy doesn't know about, and Mrs. Young becomes the companion for Georgiana, and they go away to is it Ramsgate?
Ramsgate.
They
Yeah.
go away to Ramsgate. She's 15, and she has an affectionate heart. She remembers Wickham being kind to her when she was young, and Wickham then she was persuaded to believe herself in love and consent to an elopement with Wickham through the help of Mrs. Young and Wickham. She's letting him meet her in private. And but Darcy shows up a couple days before this is supposed to happen, according to his account, unable to support the idea of grieving and offending a brother whom she almost looked up to as a father. She acknowledged the whole affair to him, and then Darcy's able to stop it. I mean, she basically says, I was going to do this, but now you're here. So it doesn't happen. Darcy says, regard for my sister's credit and feelings prevented any public exposure. And then Wickham, Wickham's really after the 30,000 pounds she's going to get, obviously, but also it would revenge himself on me. That he believes that's a strong motive for Wickham. That not only am I going to get a fortune, but I'm going to get back at Darcy. And then he says this is a faithful narrative, and I mean, he's like, don't tell anybody. But what's interesting is that something I just can realize now, it's a little thing, but he keeps it a secret, like that there was no public exposure, but there's no public exposure to have, like, nothing happened, like they didn't run, like if they had run away and then he caught them before, I guess they had sex, it would have been a big deal. But she didn't even run away.
Who's to prove? How would he prove that they hadn't had sex? Yeah. I think
but they hadn't done anything. Literally, they never left. Like, she was completely okay.
So. But she was in the power of an untrustworthy woman. Look, gossip is the more significant the young woman, the better the gossip. And look at life in Meryton, right? At once, Darcy's wealth is inflated and the number of people are coming in, his bad deeds are inflated. It doesn't matter, Ed, that nothing had actually happened. The appearance of impropriety is enough to ruin a girl as important as Georgiana Darcy.
Yes.
Right? The fact that she would even consider such a thing is potentially damaging.
And it's easier to keep it a secret because nothing, like, they never ran away. Nobody ever said anything about it. So that was, easy for him to conceal this whole, plan. And that's what happened. That's the Wickham story. And then he throws in, and if you can ask Colonel Fitzwilliam and he'll he'll confirm the truth. And that seems pretty reasonable as he's even got somebody to back him up. We'll get into her examination of the letter, in the next chapter, but this is and then he finishes one of the lines one of the things he says in the finish of this, he says, detection, like that, I'm sorry, I know not in what matter, under what form of falsehood he, Wickham, has imposed on you, but his success is not perhaps to be wondered at. Ignorant as you previously were of everything concerning either, detection could not be in your power, and suspicion certainly not in your inclination. That was the line that I found interesting, of him really assuming that things about detection not in your power. But yeah, she doesn't know the same people. How could she find out the truth of this? But the suspicion certainly not in your inclination is almost an accusation as much as a
tell me everything about that, because I see the opposite. You first.
Well, it works two ways. Like, you're so nice, you wouldn't think anything bad of him, but it's also you're naive. Why would you think something? You're not discerning enough. And this is basically, an accusation that she will then later come to herself, that she's not discerning enough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes, that totally makes sense to me. Discerning maybe feels harsh, given how much he's just invested in her discretion, at least, but yeah, naivete, that seems fair. I had taken it, I don't know why I want to see this letter, the generosity in this letter so much, but yeah, I had taken that as he's again separating his understanding of her character from her rejection of him. And maybe I'm drawn to that because it's the opposite of how Lizzy would react.
I think this happens every reading of this novel. It is like, at different times you want to be more generous, and the other times you want to condemn them more. And I can remember when we did the last show, we did Jane Eyre, like, it was just so easy to come down so hard on Rochester the whole novel. And I've read it other times, it's like, I don't come down that hard on him, so, and it hits sometimes, and that's what makes every reading great, is that will happen. But I'm seeing both this time. All righty, Fitzwilliam Darcy, he signs it. Chapter 36.
All right.
Her immediate reaction, contrariety of emotion. And then she says, when she first goes to read it, she says, with a strong prejudice against everything he might say. Like, that's how she first goes to read it. She's admitting it, and which is good. And what I love about this are the things that she'll realize. Well, then she's at the end of that first paragraph, his style was not penitent but haughty. It was all pride and insolence. I love this about the novel, in that she can't read the novel. She can't read the letter with any kind of fairness. And she even, and she thinks this out loud, like, she can't see anything beyond her own preconceptions yet, is what that is, that she's prejudiced against it right off the bat. But what I love about this novel is that right here in this chapter, Elizabeth, as the reader of the letter, is the same thing as the first time reader of the novel, in that we have, especially it's only first time readers, who were taken in by her whole point of view all along, that Wickham is good and Darcy's bad, and then everything about their characters up to the novel at this point has almost entirely been Elizabeth's point of view, or her talking about other people's point of view of them. And that's what happened. And this is now her suddenly in his letter being realized, that's what I haven't, that's my whole way I've been reading these men and these situations. And
For
now,
a few moments, she flattered herself that her wishes did not err. But when she read and reread with the closest attention, the particulars immediately following of Wickham's resigning all pretensions to the living, of his receiving in lieu so considerable a sum, etc.,
Mhm.
she again was she forced to hesitate. Yeah, the war within herself of her close reading. She's a close reader,
Mhm.
and the fun of being right about everyone and loving to hate people. Yeah, the war that's there is really beautiful.
And it's the account of Wickham that changes everything for her. That, astonishment, apprehension, horror. This must be the grossest falsehood. It's like, I'm never going to read this letter again. And she puts
Yeah,
it away.
and then she picks it right back up.
Yeah, it's like,
Yeah.
all right, we'll go back to it. And and she has to read it again. The mortifying perusal of all that related to Wickham. And she even writes, I will examine the meaning of every sentence. I mean, that's literally what she's doing, right? A close reading of it. And she realizes that she says there was gross duplicity on one side or the other. It's either Darcy was horrible or Wickham was horrible. That this is a kind of situation that it's not necessarily a he said thing. It is somebody is actually telling the truth about something and someone is concealing it. Because of this situation. That's not in every situation, but in this one that she realized.
And because their accounts are so much the same until that point where they diverge so precipitously. Yeah. And then she examines due to other behavior who is more likely to be the liar.
Yeah. And she realizes she starts writing about, what do I know about Wickham? Like all the of his former life, nothing had been known in Herefordshire but what he told himself. His countenance, voice, and manner had established him as once in the possession of every virtue. She realizes that she just took him at face value, and he's good looking and he talks well, so he must be, be telling me the truth. And
most importantly, he's good looking, he talks well, and he's into me. He's flattering to me. Whereas that other guy, haughty.
That's what we'll get to in a bit. First, she says that he's from the first time she met him, that now she's rethinking it, and she says she was now struck with the impropriety of such communications to a stranger about his life with Darcy and what Darcy had done, and wondered it had escaped her before. She saw the indelicacy of putting himself forward as he had done, the inconsistency of his profession with his conduct, like when he says, oh, Darcy won't scare me away from the ball, and then he doesn't show up. But then it's the Miss King thing. When Wickham goes after Miss King for her money, I forget how much it was, but she's rich, and he goes after her and dumps Elizabeth, stops paying attention to Elizabeth. Before she was like, yeah, well, Miss King's a nice girl. And now she realizes that, what has she said? He had either been deceived with regard to her fortune or had been gratifying his vanity by encouraging the preference which she believed she had most incautiously shown. That he either didn't know that Elizabeth had much money and that's why he was flirting with her, or he was just being, vain and flirting with her.
Or that he was out, doesn't she say here, or he was, his eagerness to grasp at anything of like, well, I'm going to keep her in my back pocket. And, depending on how things go. Yeah. She had been, sure, Miss King's a nice girl, but she also in that moment recognized that it was material concerns and was willing to give him the benefit of the doubt because she was so prejudiced in his favor, when she wasn't willing to give Charlotte that same benefit of the doubt. So there are dual standards here.
And it's I who have prided myself on my discernment, I who have valued myself on my abilities. She realized, oh my God, I thought I was so smart. But then it's about with Wickham not paying attention. She said it was vanity, not love had been my folly.
Can I?
God, please.
Okay.
Love it.
Okay. It's bad. Let me do the dialogue. How despicably have I acted, she cried. I, who have prided myself on my discernment, I, who have valued myself on my abilities, who have often disdained the generous candor of my sister and gratified my vanity in useless or blamable distrust. How humiliating is this discovery, yet how just a humiliation! Had I been in love, I could not have been more wretchedly blind, but vanity, not love, has been my folly. Skipping ahead to the mwah, till this moment, I never knew myself. We make like a big, in our Jane Austen Abridged show, we make a real big deal of this line because it's so right.
Yeah.
Here is the breaking down of prejudice, right? To recognize her own self.
Yep.
Oh God, I'm getting a little teary. Just it's so good. And you know, it's not fair to say it's the midpoint of the novel because, you know, appendices and whatnot. But it just about is.
It's roughly the center. This is the center of the novel. Yeah.
It's the center, it's the heart, it's the center
Yeah.
of the whole thing. Till this moment, I never knew myself. And not being able to know other people is really just a symptom
Yeah.
of not knowing herself. What a discovery to make, and what a discovery to allow yourself to make when it feels so much better, doesn't it? The first reading of Darcy's letter feels so much better. Like it's all on him. How dare he say these things about my family? How dare he tell these terrible lies? It would be so much easier to make him the villain and it would feel so good to be the justifiable victim to his unfairness and his pride. But she does the harder thing instead.
Yeah.
And she pushes through to learn something about herself. It's great.
It's a great moment for her. That, you know, and that she entered it thinking that Darcy, he's got a lot to learn. And now it's, you know, oh, I'm the idiot. Like, I can't believe I was the one. Now it's both of them, clearly. They both need to learn a lot, but they both need to take that step to realize, you know, who they are, that neither one of them knows themselves in a sense. So
yeah, and that she starts to see, and I know we'll get there, but she starts to reframe Jane's disappointment.
And that's what's next. Yeah. Now after dealing with this, now she can look back at the Jane and Bingley episode and realize, and she says how widely different was the effect of a second perusal of reading Darcy's account of this now. And that she says she could not help remembering what Charlotte's opinion had always been. Let remind everybody of that, chapter 6, when Elizabeth is telling when Elizabeth and Charlotte are together talking about how Jane's being all nice and not overly dramatic about Darcy. She's not behaving like Marianne in Sense and Sensibility about Bingley. Charlotte says, it is sometimes a disadvantage to be so very guarded. If a woman conceals her affection with the same skill from the object of it, she may lose the opportunity of fixing him, and it will then be but poor consolation to believe the world equally in the dark. That she says, you know, a woman had better show more affection than she feels. Charlotte takes it a step further, like, you really got to show that you're in love with them. But when she begins that, it's just like, no, the woman's got to show that she does feel to begin with, or she's not going to get the guy. And that's what happened.
And that she reframes even beyond Jane's own conduct, right? In her first read of the letter, it was, how dare Darcy keep Bingley and Jane apart? And by that second reading, it's, oh, how dare my family with their terrible behavior affect Jane and I in this way? And first time readers note this discovery of the propriety of family. This is important in the world of Jane Austen. This is something worth remembering.
She said she recognized the justice of the charge of their way of family. And then she says Jane's disappointment had in fact been the work of her nearest relations. That she in effect comes to the conclusion, like, you know, Darcy didn't really keep Bingley and Jane apart. My family did. And then she goes home, and then she finds out that Darcy and Colonel Fitzwilliam had stopped to say goodbye. Darcy just like, oh, I'm stopping to say goodbye to everyone. Okay, bye. And he walks out. But Colonel Fitzwilliam stays for an hour waiting for Elizabeth, and she doesn't come. So
he was no longer her object anyway.
nope.
Just her letter. Yeah. Before she goes home, in this realization it was her family's conduct, she says she felt depressed beyond anything she had ever known before. Lizzy is described as someone who laughs herself out of any sadness. And this feels like, oh, there's something that feels a permanent discovery in my family's shortcomings, that it counts. Yeah. Painful.
Well, what we get next here in chapter 37, it's I don't know, this is Austen playing the Shakespeare card, in that we're going to be all serious and talk about the serious stuff, and now I'm going to have the clown come in, and now we're going to have some fun. And then she has these great scenes with Lady Catherine,
There'll be a knocking at the door, and Collins will be drunk. Yeah.
Lady Catherine imagining that, Colonel Fitzwilliam and Darcy was so depressed at having to go away from me. And it's all funny stuff that she has going on to them about them. His attachment to Rosings certainly increases about Darcy. And Elizabeth thinks it's hilarious because clearly, she imagines oh my God, what would Lady Catherine think if she knew what happened yesterday?
Yeah. What's also funny is it's funny that Lizzy must be feeling more generous of spirit of Darcy, because I think a previous incarnation of Lizzy would have said, my relations are embarrassing. Your relations are embarrassing, sir. But she doesn't have that thought written in the text. She just leaves that thought to me to have, they are. But if she were feeling defensive, she could point out the folly of them to her mind of who does he think he is? But instead, she just sort of enjoys. Yeah.
And it's interesting that's all there, that Austen doesn't point that out to the reader. That's left for the reader to work out for themselves. That, then it's all part of that, Austen kind of accepting the class system that she has, but pointing out how messed up it is to people. But I'm not going to do it. I'm not this isn't a revolution here. We're not doing away with Lady Catherine lording it over us, because Lady Catherine can lord it over us, but she's awfully ridiculous, isn't she? Yeah. And
nor should we refold our gowns before we let's draw the line.
Well, but then Lady Catherine is has to then she mentions, she wants her to stay another month, and Elizabeth's like, no, I'm not. And I can imagine that she says Lady Catherine seemed resigned after this, but I can imagine Lady Catherine is really annoyed that Elizabeth is not taking her advice.
Oh, sure. You know what I also love? It's so sly. You must write to your mother to beg that you may stay a little longer. Mrs. Collins will be glad of your company, I am sure. Lizzy said, I am much obliged to your ladyship for your kind invitation. I mean, is it an invitation when she's not?
No, it's an order.
Yeah. Hey, everyone on YouTube right now, I invite you to Ed's house this week for a New Year's celebration. He's going to make cocktails for all of you. I think you should go.
That's tempting. I would consider doing that. So.
And if one of you stays late into the night, I may take you home in my carriage. Maybe. If the weather's good. It's so, just the whole stay a whole month, right? It's so sly. Jane Austen, your humor is so sly.
She doesn't have to take care of her. Mr. Collins and Mrs. Collins do. So
yeah. And if you will stay another month complete, it will be in my power to take one of you, right? The other can go hang, to take one of you as far as London, for I'm going there early in June for a week. And as Dawson does not object to the Bruges box, there'll be very good room for one of you. And indeed, if the weather should happen to be cool, I should not object to taking you both, as they are neither of you large. Well, let's hope for cool weather. Otherwise, Mariah's riding on the roof. Or they're going to mail her post, right. Stay and I will make this far less convenient for you to know how to travel. It's just tickling.
I also love how she points out, and we get this kind of, she says, your mother won't have any problem. And Elizabeth's like, oh no, but my father wants me home. And Lady Catherine can't understand that. Now, Now, this is an interesting part about her too, because Lady Catherine she's the powerful female.
Mhm.
And she can't imagine that it's the mother who matters. The father doesn't even matter in her. Now, if her husband was alive, I think it would be a different story. But she's now in a position where it's all about the mother, and she can't believe that. But it also speaks too of Elizabeth's devotion to her father. She wants to be with her father as much as she wants to be home with Jane. She doesn't want to be with anybody else.
Yeah.
But she misses her daddy.
And the comic overturning here of gendered norms, right? Because as you say, Lady Catherine is such a powerful figure, and Sir Louis de Bourgh is long gone. Yeah, I have to believe that Oscar Wilde, in writing Lady Bracknell in his masterpiece, had Lady Catherine on the brain. Lady Bracknell, one of the great lines in that play is Lady Bracknell says, like, "And if your father would want that, I will be the one to inform him," or something like that. Yeah, it's the gender reversal of like the iron female speaking to, men as a head of the household is good stuff. Yeah.
We need to have Lady Catherine say, "A handbag?" At some point in this novel.
That plays on my bucket list.
And then she has this other thing that is fascinating. She's like, all right, well, she's resigned, they're gonna go. And then she talks about, "I cannot bear the idea of two young women traveling by post themselves. You have to take a servant with you." And then she says, "When my niece Georgiana went to Ramsgate last summer, I made the point of her having two manservants go with her. Like, I protected her."
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Mhm.
you didn't. What you did had zero effect on Georgiana being in Dangerous. The manservants are not going to stop Wickham from doing what he wants to do with anybody. So, yeah. So, and that's clearly the reader's supposed to notice that, like that's the exact thing that Darcy just wrote the letter about.
Oh, for sure. Hot on the heels of the letter. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And then you talk about Elizabeth wanting to be, she says that she has this moment. She looks forward to her solitary walks. Whenever she was alone, she gave way to it as the greatest relief, and not a day went by without a solitary walk in which she might indulge in all the delight of unpleasant recollections. So this is, she's going to wallow in it a bit.
Wallow.
There's a delight in that, well, clearly that's what is written here. That I don't think it's necessarily being ironic. It is being like, I'm going to let this overtake me. This is,
it's the most important thing that's ever happened to her. And it feels tied to that feeling depressed about these realizations about her own family's impropriety and what that means for her life. And also mixed in there, she speaks to the gratitude of such an important person, right? It's right at the beginning of this chapter where she says, what would it be, how to be introduced as the future niece? Like, she has said no, but she keeps turning around the what ifs, the importance of this proposal, this terrible, badly done proposal. She feels its importance,
and she realizes that her like there's nothing, nothing's going to change here. She still doesn't like Darcy, she says, and but she says her family's never going to change. And then again, she reiterates Jane had been deprived by the folly and indecorum of her own family. I mean, she comes back to that a second time, that this is what she's going to have to, go home and face now for her life, is that her family is going to prevent Jane herself, and we'll get to the worst things that will happen later, from Jane or Elizabeth ever marrying well. The last line I think is funny. They leave Lady Catherine. When they parted, Lady Catherine with great condescension wished them a good journey and invited them to come to Hunsford again next year. And Miss de Bourgh exerted herself so far as to curtsy and hold out her hand to both.
In what I imagine is the most dead fish gesture that's ever.
That's all she can manage.
His hand's there for you to grip it.
That's all she can manage. So, last chapter for this week, 38. Mr. Collins is really nice here. And he's still ridiculous, but he's nice. Your kindness in coming to us, he talks to her. He says, I hope you will believe us grateful for the condescension that we have done everything in our power to prevent you spending your time unpleasantly. I mean, he's still ridiculous, and he's ridiculously obsequious. He starts talking about, Lady Catherine and all, but he's this is the most genuine he's been in a sense. Like, he's really happy that I think in a way that, because before he was real happy, like, haha, Elizabeth, this is the life you could have had. But now he seems to be like, I don't know, this is what you're supposed to say, and it's nice.
It is, but it is still on his mind, right? He stops himself from speaking of it. And I think the way he's like, oh, our humble abode, oh, there's nothing for a lady to do, a lady like yourself. He wasn't concerned about that when he proposed. Is this not being enough for her? I think it does still feel fresh on his mind. I mean, yes, I still post pictures to Facebook, hoping my exes from 20 years ago will see them.
Elizabeth thinks words were insufficient for the elevation of his feelings, and he was obliged to walk about the room. Elizabeth tried to unite civility and truth in a few short sentences. As soon as he starts talking about Lady Catherine and Rosings, he's like, he can't even speak.
He wants her to, right? He does want her to remember how important his life is here, even as he speaks otherwise. But I think you're right. I think there's something nice about this here that reflects he's truly happy with Charlotte. I think I take him at face value when he says, like, oh, we're made for each other.
He thinks he got the catch accidentally.
Yeah.
Like, I inadvertently got the one that I wanted and didn't know. I mean, he was just proposing to anybody, so of course.
He got lucky for sure. And I do think
we seem to have been designed for each other, he says of Charlotte. Now we know what Charlotte thinks. So, and Elizabeth then turns up with poor Charlotte. It was melancholy to leave her in such society, but she had chosen it with her eyes open. And then that meant her home and her housekeeping, her parish and her poultry, and all their dependent concerns had not yet lost their charms. Charlotte got the things that she never thought she was going to get.
Yeah.
Well, and that she had stopped thinking she was going to get, and she got it.
I do feel, maybe it's just the alliteration, I do feel on Lizzie's point of view, a smallness to what Charlotte's got.
Her parish and her poultry. Yeah.
Which, based on the number of my friends who keep chickens and won't shut up about it, I say with affection. What's wrong with that? Isn't it in every
that is though, it is a bit satiric. It's her. I can now hear her father saying that. Yes. Oh, her home and her housekeeping, her parish and her poultry.
But what's wrong with that? I think, right? Aren't we seeing in all these articles of like a new year of give yourself time for peace, give yourself rest, give yourself self-care, or whatever, however we're going to commodify taking better care of ourselves in 2023. Like, what's wrong with finding joy in the life you're building? I think it sounds nice. She's got her own little sitting room. Like, chickens can be affectionate. Leave her alone, Lizzy. I think, I just
thank you. I hadn't seen that. That is there. That is definitely there. That's her father talking.
Yeah, that's beautifully said. Yeah, I hadn't gone so far to see that. Yeah, that's beautifully said. But it's enough for Charlotte. Charlotte's different to Lizzy.
And then it's just goodbyes. They say goodbye, and Mariah has this, we have dined 9 times at Rosings, besides drinking tea there twice. How much shall I have to tell? Elizabeth privately added, and how much I shall have to conceal. So a different end for Elizabeth than from Mariah.
And thank you, Jane Austen, for not giving us the full 4 hours of Mariah's conversation. Great. I will get this anecdote half wrong. I intended to look it up and then I forgot. Is I believe it is, and maybe in the first edition, or maybe someone in the chat can help us out. This how much I shall have to tell and how much I shall have to conceal. I believe that in the first edition of this novel, the attribution of the speaker of how much I shall have to conceal was incorrect. It was either like seemingly given to Mariah or the whole line was seemingly given to Lizzy. It was something like that. And it's such a good line, and it speaks to Lizzie's state of mind so much. Like, what a tragedy for this like young author, early career author, right? To have such an important moment just be ruined by a hasty editor. Something like that. Is someone in the chat helping us out? I can't see it.
I don't know. I'm looking at my edition, see if there's a note for it, but there isn't, so I don't know.
Yeah, there wasn't in mine too, but it's something like that. Go Google it.
Go find a first edition. So I have one at work. I just don't have it here. So
Oh,
there you go.
fancy.
I'll look it up and let you
Yeah,
know.
I'll put it. I'll
I
look it
can
up.
literally just go to the first edition and look it
I'll
up.
put it into the Facebook group. And apologies that I didn't get to it this evening. I had intended to.
There you go. Well, all righty. Well, Jane-ites, thank you all for tuning in today. Thank you to our show sponsor, Lisa Washington. Thanks to all of you who have donated or joined as members over the last week. Your support helps us bring the show to everyone, create other one-of-a-kind programs and courses, and also helps us care for our collections at the Rosenbach. And I want to particularly thank Janice R. of Longport, New Jersey, who made a donation. Hi, Janice. I know Janice. She does the Shakespeare read-alouds with us as well. Many of you have also joined the Rosenbach as members. Rosenbach membership gives you free museum admission, discounts on programs and courses, and exclusive invitations to members-only events. And I would invite you to join and become a member of the Rosenbach as well. It really is true that this show wouldn't exist without your support. So thank you everyone who has supported this show and the Rosenbach since we've started. Remember, we have an Austen Mondays Facebook group where we can look up where you can continue the conversation. Look us up on Facebook and join in that conversation. And if you're as you're watching this video, go to the thing and subscribe to the Rosenbach channel and like the videos. That helps us grow audience as well. And leave comments there as well. That really helps us get greater visibility too. That's all in that algorithm, comments, and then it goes higher in the mentions and the searches and all that stuff. Thank you to Juliette Wells for taking a turn about the room with us today. Join us on our next episode when all the co-hosts, Casey, Lauren, and Kathleen, will join me for Kira and All the Rest, a discussion of the film and TV adaptations that are not the 1995 BBC one, which we already did a whole show on. It's unfair that we're now doing lump them all together. I think the Keira Knightley one, that 2005 one, could do a whole show too, but we're not. So there you go.
It's going to be great. I already have agenda items. I want to talk about Wishbone.
Wishbone, first impressions. Yes, we got to talk about that. So anything, Bride and Prejudice is fair game, as well as the other straight adaptations. Lost in Austen, I'm definitely going to talk about. Great BBC TV series that I loved. Thank you to Tucker Christine, who wrote our opening and closing credits music as Pleated Gazelle. Thanks to my daughter Lulu, who's going to Princeton, but for now, she shot and created the credits with me. Farewell, readers. I hope you will believe me grateful for the condescension and that we have done everything in our power to prevent you from spending your time unpleasantly. All right, gang. Bye-bye. So many things to click. Bye.